All right, so I'm going to talk to you guys about research. So if you have it printed out, you can write notes on this. If you don't have it printed out, you should definitely take some notes on these things and then maybe transfer it to that or whatever. But you should definitely put the notes in your RLD notes. So yeah, let's talk briefly about this. What do you think about Wikipedia? First off, you guys tell me, can you use Wikipedia?
Not really.
No.
Okay. What do you mean by not really?
Like there might be some things that might be true, but it's assuming like a small percentage of it since anyone can post anything on there. So not really.
Okay, you're on to the right track there. So the reason why we don't want you to use Wikipedia is because we are unsure of whoever put that information up there. Now, Wikipedia is not quite like the Wild West anymore. There are admin, there are checks and balances in place where if someone tries to edit a page, it can end up getting locked, or it has to be reviewed, or they need to cite a source if they make a claim of fact. So there's a lot with Wikipedia that makes it actually good information, but the problem is the authority. The authority is not there. Remember the CRAP test? If you guys watch that video on the CRAP test from that other school's library, they use an example from Wikipedia and they walk you through. So anything that is said that is a claim of fact on Wikipedia should have a link to a resource that should be credible. So you can click on the link and it'll bring you all the way to the bottom, or you can just scroll all the way to the bottom and check out the footnotes. So that's useful. The thing is, you're never, like you said, Stephanie, you're never going to use Wikipedia in your essay as your own source. However, you can find sources through Wikipedia. You still have to put those sources through the CRAP test, but Wikipedia is actually a good tool for familiarizing yourself with a topic. The reason is, if you don't know anything about that topic yet, if you're just really ignorant to anything going on with it, you should do a Google search. You should search the topics, search something you know about the topic that you want to explore about it. And one of the first things that's going to come up is probably a Wikipedia page. You can click on that Wikipedia page and maybe you will find more key terms that will help you figure out exactly what you need to be searching about. So it doesn't mean you believe the information necessarily, but the chances of that information being good are higher than not. It's more likely that the information is roughly good, so you can use that information to help you go further in finding more specific things to research about on that topic. So you can go to Wikipedia, you can even go to pro-con websites. You will never use pro-con websites. You can even go to social media to try and see what people are arguing about. The only time you're going to quote a social media post or something like that is if it's an example. You're never going to use that infographic that you got off social media as your actual source. It can be an example, not the source. So I want to talk a little bit more about sources. Why do you use a source? Like what do you use a source for? You've got two reasons why you would use a source. Two, you're arguing against what someone is saying. You're arguing for or against. Remember that agree, disagree, or both thing? You are using what someone has already said to put what you are saying into context for your reader. So either it's the person or it's the thing, but that's not something you're using for support. So you're either bringing it up as an example or as the context for the thing that you're talking about, which that does not count as one of your four sources ever. That doesn't count. What counts is the second reason you would use a source, which is you're not an expert. You're not an expert on any of this stuff, which is fine. So you find an expert. You don't have to be a credible source. You just have to represent credible sources properly. So that's what I mean by the sources that you need to use at the bottom of the requirements on the prompts. It's always going to be something that supports your claims. And understand this. This is a huge note. Put stars around it, highlight it, squiggly circle around it. It is important that what you use for support is not just someone else parroting what you have already said. You don't throw a quote in there just so that you can count it as one of your quotes when all they're doing is saying the thing that you wanted to say. When you bring in support, support is evidence. Here, what are the types of support? Let me tell you. These are types of support. So you've got facts, regular facts and statistics, which obviously you need to make sure are credible, that they're not just on an infographic and someone is talking about racial crimes and things like that, and they just throw it on this infographic and they pass it around social media. That's not what I'm talking about. You find authoritative statistics, and you want to explain how they came to those statistics. So remember, this is how you get substance in your essay. You make a claim. You have a claim of fact as your thesis, but within that claim of fact, in order to prove it, you have smaller claims of fact that will all work together to support the larger claim of fact. So in those smaller ones, you need to support those. So what you do is you bring in evidence. So when you bring in a source, this is another thing that you should always make sure that you do. When you quote something, make sure you explain why it's credible. The only time that you are going to start a quote with so-and-so says in their article blank, it's going to be for the first reason why you quote something, which is you are engaging that as your context. Never with the thing that you're using for supporting your point do you need to really say so-and-so says in this work, unless saying that on its own is enough to point to the credibility of that source. So it's all about, why should I believe this source? You want to tell me why I should believe it before you give me the information on it. That only makes sense, because the whole time that you're giving me this information, I, or anyone who's reading it, is thinking, yeah, but why should I believe this information? Where did you get it from? Say it first so that people can focus on what you're saying rather than on what you're not saying. So it's all about the order, right? Make it a logical flow. If someone's going to have a question about something, make sure you answer the question as much as you can before you give them the material that you know they're going to have questions about. You qualify what you're saying. You make your claim. There's been plenty of studies that have been done to prove this. Specifically here, this study that was conducted on like 5,000 people, random double-blind test. You see what I'm saying? There's information that you're giving about the study. Let's say if the study is on a corporation, on something about a corporation's product, and the study was paid for by the corporation, does that give credibility to the study, or does that take away credibility from the study? Okay, so if a corporation has a study done on their product, what do they want their product to look like in the outcome? They want their product to look good. So the chances of that being tampered with are higher in probability. Now, if we say that the study is done by a third party, that's giving credibility to it. Now, you don't want to lie. You also don't want to use a study that has been done by the company itself. Also, maybe you use this as an argument in your essay. Maybe you're fighting statistics that someone else has put out. Those statistics are from a study that was done by the company themselves. That's a thing. It works both ways. If you're agreeing with or disagreeing with something, you want to back up your claims, but you also want to pick apart the claims that you're fighting against. Like that, statistics don't just stand as you can't argue against this. How are they applied? How were these numbers figured out? There's a lot going on with statistics where you can manipulate the numbers. And so if you can figure out how the numbers were figured, you can figure out if they were done non-biasedly or if there was some other purpose in it. So when you bring in a source, what's the credibility of the source? And then when you talk about the information from the source, like the facts or statistics or whatever, you want to say how they were figured out. And so if your source doesn't do that, chances are it's not the best source for it. But maybe that source tells you what the name of the study is. That means you go and you find the study. Like, don't be lazy and just go with the first source that's just talking about another source. You want to, oh, you're talking about this other source? I'll just go and look at that other source. The only reason why it will be acceptable for you to use a source that's talking about another source is if you're unable to get to that other source. But if you do this, I'm going to check your work and I'm going to see if you can get to that other source. So just make sure that you are not getting third, fourth party information like 3 or 4 times removed from the original. That's ridiculous and unnecessary. So there's another resource that you guys will have up here. You've got the school library database. You guys know that? So if you click on this link, which is in the writing tools, so you can either click on it from here. If you have it open as a PDF, you just hit Control and your mouse, and you should be able to open that tab up. And you can go through workshops where the library actually leads you in figuring out how to use the databases, how to do research. There's all kinds of workshops in there. So if you don't already know how to do it, I would encourage you to do that. However, you can find some pretty good sources just from Google alone, but you need to hunt a little bit more for them. Sometimes you may hit a paywall if it's like a scholarly journal or database of some kind that you're led to through Google or Google Scholar. But if it does make it so that you have to type in credentials, you may be able to type in your actual school credentials. Your portal login might be able to get you in through there. And if it doesn't, then you can always now look for that resource from Google. So you just type in the paper name or the author of it into the library database search. And then maybe since you're already logged in through the library, you'll be able to access it that way. So try and do what you can to navigate. That's what you're pretty much working with. So yeah, types of support. We talked about facts. So historical accounts and legal precedents. So that's what's in the courts right there, or historical accounts. So this stuff is, you really need to make sure that it's an authority and that there's documentation. You want to make sure, like, don't just pull it out of a textbook. Surprisingly, textbooks, a lot of the time, they don't give an actual resource. They just expect you to believe what they are saying is true. We will talk about why that's acceptable for them, but not for you, or only sometimes for you. We'll talk about that in a second. You also have expert opinion, once again, heavily relying on what that person's expertise is. So the reason why you would give expert opinion is because there are no facts on the matter. And so you can only leave it up to an expert on what they think, what they would assume with their wealth of knowledge on the topic could be the results of something that we don't have any statistics about yet, which there are quite a few things that we don't know. We don't know enough yet. So that's why you may bring that in, bring in a scholar instead of like hard data. Testimony, eyewitness news reports. So that's useful, but just remember, if you talk about personal experience, you're going to keep that to a minimum. You actually don't want to bring your own personal experience into a paper very much. It doesn't actually help prove your point very well. Just because you've experienced something, or just because one person has experienced something, it doesn't mean everyone's experienced that. And even if you bring up your eyewitness account, there's someone else who could bring up an eyewitness account of the exact opposite kind. And who's to tell if you should be believed or they should be believed? And that's the problem with anecdotal evidence. When someone says, oh yeah, well, this happened to me, and then they spread it around and expect it to be true for everyone, that's not necessarily true. Even with journalistic reporting, when they get eyewitness information, they need to get at least 3 eyewitnesses. Even in a court of law, you need the testimony of 2 or more, because people are biased and your own senses are so misleading sometimes that it's very difficult to trust them. And then yet in the court of law, we have to actually trust them. So you need more people to have experienced the same thing. Now, this is where you can use and why you would use your own experience. Your experience gives a close-up, or someone else's experience gives a close-up of a scenario. Now, it's still just one account, but it helps your reader. It's still useful. It's still compelling, but you can't be depending solely on pathos. So if you bring something up, it's okay to bring up a personal experience, but then if you want to actually prove that point, if you want someone to believe it, then you would also want to bring up statistics that back it up and say, sure, this is just one account, but look at the statistics. The statistics actually say that this is what the majority of people deal with, or the majority of people in this ethnic group, or in this local area, or whatever it is within this demographic. So you see how you want to put it together with something else that is going to be more compelling. So then you've got a close-up of it, of the scenario for your reader to be able to visualize and to really make them feel the issue that's at hand. And then you give them statistics to help them understand that it's not just a one-time thing. So try not to bring in your own personal experience unless you're going to be able to back it up with a larger data set. And you can totally do that. Students do that all the time and it works. It makes your argument stronger to put those together. This last bit, so this is super important for you to be able to assess. So not only are there these types of support, not only are there these ways to research and how you would use it, what you would actually use research for, but then there's also deciding the quality of your support and the need for support. So think about this. So once again, CRAP test. Is the source trustworthy, credible, reliable, accurate? Details though. So make sure they give you enough details. Like I said, if they just tell you statistics blindly, but they don't tell you how those statistics were figured out, you need to go and find that out if you want to use it. Because if you just say, these are the stats, but those stats could be from a biased company, from a biased source, and maybe the study was done poorly, then it could be misleading, incredibly misleading. So you need to be able to know that it's a trustworthy statistical source, and you need to be able to show us. You don't have to drag it on forever, but you do need to say that stuff. It could all be in the sentence right before it. Should be enough. So this part though, this is important. I know it's not very pretty looking, but this is a little bit of a spectrum. So textbooks, some of the reason why they don't cite a source is because it's common knowledge information that can be found on many sources. So once again, you deciding on what to use as a source is not just, crap, I have to have 4 sources here, so I'm just going to find a source for anything that I can. No, you need sources to back up strong enough claims. Since those claims are so strong, you have to be able to back those up. This is how you make a real essay that goes far enough, that gives you enough to work with to need 5 pages to prove it. So when you go through the idea of, do I need to prove this? So is it already realistic? Is it already believable? If what you are saying as your claim, which sometimes you have to do this, you have to do this quite a bit, is make claims that are obvious to build up to stronger claims. So you're starting with information that you are assuming is fact because we already know that it's fact. So you don't need to explain gravity. You don't need a source that definitively proves that we have gravity. That is already something that is common knowledge. You don't have to have a source for that. Don't waste that source. I won't count it as a source. So if it's realistic, you don't even need it. You don't even need a source if it's easy to believe, meaning it is not just something that's commonly spread around, but that it's actually something that we all know is fact. But if it starts going further down this way on the spectrum, the further it gets towards mind-blowing, the more sources or the stronger sources you need in order to back it up. So if I say everyone's a drug addict, well, then I'm going to need some pretty strong evidence to back that up, depending on how I'm arguing it, though. So if it's harder to believe, it needs significant proof. Sometimes for that one claim you were making, like in your thesis statement, you might need 10 sources just to back that up. And you make smaller claims along the way to back that up. And so maybe one claim you need 3 sources for. It's true. It could happen where you really need to make sure without a shadow of doubt that your reader is on board with you and they're like, okay, you proved it enough. Sometimes you may need to do that. Sometimes you may not need a source at all for it. So think about it. Is it easier to believe or harder to believe, depending on what we already know with common knowledge? And so a lot of times in the textbooks, they don't need a source. And then other times they do need sources and they just don't give them because they're like, we're the authority, which is pretty jacked up. So that's why you're not going to use textbooks as your source because they're not doing enough. They might be able to point you to stuff to use though. And so you can talk to me about that if you need.
We won't use them as a source, but we can quote from them and still like include it. Like if we were to add, I don't know, some type of idea or something that we might think like, oh, maybe this is supporting it in a sense.
So that's the thing. If it doesn't give you a source, if it doesn't explain how, like a textbook, don't use it. No. So If the textbook just has an idea that already agrees with what you're saying, like if you can already put it in your own words and it's not something that you would really technically need to quote someone on because that information is everywhere. It's in textbooks. It's on 10 different sources you can find online. It's common knowledge. You don't need a source for that. You don't need a source for an argument unless it's something you're arguing against, unless it's something that is giving you context. So maybe you're arguing against something in a textbook. You could use it for that case. You could say, well, this textbook says this, but that is actually false. And then you build your whole argument around proving that that's false. But you never want to use a source, like I was saying earlier, you never want to use a source to say something that you could say on your own. That is a waste of a source. I do not count that as a source. So a textbook is generally not going to do you any favors with that. They may bring up an argument that you do want to make, but you don't have to quote them for that if it's a common argument that anyone would make, that anyone could make. They don't own it. Are we all clear on that?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm really glad you asked, by the way, because that is something that students struggle the most with. Figuring out what exactly is the kind of source that I can use. Every student that I've had that has tried to use a textbook has had a miserable time with it. And so I try to steer you guys away from things that are going to make your assignments more difficult for you. So once again, remember, we were looking at this. We passed up this right here. So news sources. So I want to show you, oh wait, that's not right. That's upside down. Okay, let's try this one. Okay, so what you'll see here is we have a chart, an infographic that I did not create. I didn't create any of these. There's a bunch of them, and maybe they've changed quite a bit because a lot has gone on since 2017. So you will see to the left, there's overall quality and the difference in what is being reported. So the things in this yellow area right here, you'll notice have a lot more opinion and complex analysis, but they're still making claims that aren't just the facts. Stuff up here is more likely to be fact reporting, but there's still some other factors here. Like if you look at the top, you'll notice media bias. So notice there's stuff on the right and the left. Some are more to the right, some are more to the left. But what I need you to understand is, so I didn't make these charts. If I would have made these charts, no matter which chart I'm looking at, so some of them I would put in different categories or different places. Some I feel are like MSNBC should probably be lower down in quality. Same with Fox News. I don't even see Fox News on here.
Down a little bit.
Oh, you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, right there. You have to mouse.
Well, that's Fox News Daily Wire, so that's a specific one. So you can already, isn't this silly? You can even see bias in the way these charts were made, right? A lot of the, I haven't seen one of these charts that's made by someone who is more conservative, but you'll see like BuzzFeed is up here. BuzzFeed shouldn't even be close to this. Yeah, this should be down lower too. There's a lot of these that should really be just so much further down in quality, and then further apart further in bias, if that makes sense. This one, it's roughly the same too. But you guys get how there's different sources of each thing. So not to drag this out any further, just notice that you're going to find a lot more bias than people expect, and you're going to find less quality than you would hope for. And so that's why you need to be more discerning in the way that you come to articles and resources that you should be able to use for evidence or support or information to be able to come to your own ideas about. One thing that you should notice, AP, which stands for Associated Press, and Reuters here, these are international sources. So Associated Press, it's a nonprofit cooperative of journalists. Reuters is also, I mean, there's obviously someone who owns these, but They are supposed to give just the facts, and it's international. And these articles from Associated Press and Reuters tend to get picked up by national and local news sources. AP articles and Reuters articles are supposed to be the least biased, most objective sources that you can work with. And I would tend to agree. There might still be some bias that slips in depending on how they word something, but they go to their best efforts to not let anything slip in. At least when we're talking about standards, they're higher up, way higher up. I completely agree with where they are at least above everyone else. So understand that then other news sources, especially what you will watch as news sources, national, they will take some of these and maybe they'll even just be lazy and they will just change the title. But do you understand how powerful it is just to change the title of something? The title will tell you how to read it. It will give you the slant to read it with, like what to look for and how to interpret the material. Giving something a different title is incredibly powerful. So don't look at that as being benign. It can be incredibly manipulative to change the title of something. So you can see like the same Associated Press article might be taken up by another company. So let's look at an example of this really quick. So I'm telling you some stuff about these, right? So Reuters and Associated Press articles get picked up by national and local news, and they tend to focus on those. They don't just like cut and paste it, but sometimes they will focus on elements that are important to their political stance, because all national news sources for some reason now are tending to be biased towards a political party. Like it's all of them, some more than others. They might do that, but then local news does its own reporting too, and you'd be surprised because national news will pick up local articles also. So I'm going to show you an example, but local articles will tend to focus on what is pertinent, what is important towards the local issue that their readership might be interested about with that. So let's say if there's a bombing, they'll say, well, who from our area died in that bombing? So that's an example. So for our next essay, our third essay, don't think about this right now, but our third essay is going to be on freedom of speech. So we're just going to look at an example of something to look at with that. But once again, don't even start trying to think about that. You're not dealing with that right now. We're not going there. Don't get excited. So this article specifically from First Amendment Watch, it's at New York University and it's a project of this journalism institute. So they're really into it. So you'll notice what they posted here about threatening lyrics in music. You can see that there's actually several articles that they either got their information from or that also talk about this. So you can see there's an Associated Press article. There is a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which is local news article. And then there is a Washington Post article. And so you can see the different ways that they report on it. So there's different focuses. And so this is the local one, and then Washington Post. So they might all have a different title, which may give you a different slant in how you are interpreting the material or what is important in what happened. So that's something to look at. But I want you to know, just like be familiar, because eventually there's going to be a crap test assignment that's going to be significant. I'll give you more information on that later, but just know you're going to have to be able to do this stuff with sources. So make sure you understand what you're working with sources, and that you can't blindly trust anyone. You have to at least assess the information that's being given to you and explore it a little bit before you just say, sure, okay. So you can see that this person, where's MSNBC? So if MSNBC is higher up than Fox News, I mean, it could be a little higher, but yeah, that's way higher. They're both pretty bad. They're both highly biased. So it kind of already shows what the person who made this chart thinks. Still useful, still tells you which slants roughly, like you can agree with most of what's said here. Definitely don't use InfoWars. That is garbage. And there is garbage on the other side too, but this one's more famous. So I'm sure you've all heard of InfoWars. Don't use the Inquirer. That is all garbage media. There's tons of garbage media though. BuzzFeed is garbage media. You guys get it? Does this make sense? Any other questions about this stuff? Yeah, I think we covered it all. You have your marching orders. You know what you need to do. So have a good rest of your weekend.